Extraterrestrial Innovation, Analysts, discovered humans build tools for future generations. Part 1. The shuttle descended through Earth's atmosphere with barely a whisper. Inside, senior analyst Osh reviewed his for the third time that morning. His scaled fingers moved across the screen with practiced efficiency, checking off items on his survey list. This was supposed to be routine work, just another assessment of a newly contacted species. Beside him, pressed her face against the viewport, her large eyes taking in every detail of the blue planet below. She was young for a barely 30 cycles old, and this was her first field assignment with the Galactic Innovation Consortium. Her enthusiasm made Osh's head ache. "It's beautiful," she said, her voice carrying that musical quality all possessed. "So much water." "It's adequate," Osh replied. He had seen hundreds of worlds in his 2 centuries of service. One more ball of rock and liquid didn't impress him. "Remember, we're here to assess their technological development, not admire their landscape." The humans had only joined the galactic community 6 months ago. Their application to the consortium was still pending, which was why Osh and his team had been sent. They would evaluate human innovation, categorize their advancement level, and file the appropriate reports. Simple, clean, done in a week. The shuttle landed at a human facility they called a university. Osh had read about these institutions during the flight. They were knowledge centers where humans trained their young. Most species had similar places, though the consortium had noted that human universities seemed unusually focused on research with no immediate practical application. A human woman met them at the landing pad. She was middle-aged by human standards, her hair showing streaks of gray. She introduced herself as Dr. Sarah, a liaison for the human government. "Welcome to Earth," she said, smiling in that way humans did to show friendliness. "We've prepared workspaces for your team and granted access to our technical databases." Osh inclined his head. "We appreciate your cooperation. We'll begin our assessment immediately." The next 3 days passed in a blur of data review. Osh's team spread through the databases, analyzing human achievements. Their space travel technology was adequate if unrefined. Their computer systems were functional but primitive. Their energy production relied heavily on fusion, which was standard for species at their development level. Everything seemed normal, predictable, exactly what Osh expected from a young spacefaring civilization. Then found something odd. "Senior analyst," she called across the workspace, "could you look at this?" Osh walked to her station, his patience already thin, had a habit of getting excited about irrelevant details. But when he looked at her screen, his irritation faded into confusion. She had pulled up construction records for a human structure called a cathedral. The building had taken over 200 years to complete. The humans who designed it had died long before the first stone was laid. The humans who laid the foundation never saw the walls. The humans who built the walls never saw the roof. "Why would they do this?" asked. The original designers gained nothing from this project. They spent their entire lives planning something they knew they would never see. Osh studied the records. Perhaps it was a religious obligation. Many primitive species have such customs. But was already pulling up more examples. A forest planted by humans 300 years ago, trees specifically chosen for timber that wouldn't be ready for harvest until the planters' great-great were old. A dam built to last 500 years when the average human lived less than 100. A library designed to preserve books for 1,000 years. "This isn't isolated," said, her voice rising with excitement. "It's everywhere in their databases. Humans consistently build things designed to outlast them by centuries." Osh felt a strange discomfort in his chest. In his 200 years, he had assessed 47 different species. His own people built efficiently. Structures were designed to last through their natural, perhaps a bit longer with proper maintenance. The who lived only 70 cycles built even more efficiently, preferring modular designs that could be quickly replaced. Every species he knew built for their own use or the use of their children. Perhaps there if they were feeling particularly generous. But humans were building for descendants 10, 20, even 50 generations removed. It's inefficient, Osh said finally. They're wasting resources on projects they'll never benefit from. But why? Pressed. Every species optimizes for their own lifetime. It's basic evolutionary logic. You don't spend energy on things that don't benefit you or your immediate offspring. Yet humans do this constantly. Osh didn't have an answer. He returned to his own station and began searching the databases himself. What he found disturbed him more than he wanted to admit. The humans had built a repository for nuclear waste deep underground. The facility was designed to contain dangerous materials for 10,000 years. 10,000 years. The entirety of recorded history spanned only 12,000 years. These humans, who lived less than a century, were planning for that exceeded most civilizations. He found more examples. A seed vault built into a mountain, designed to preserve plant genetics for future generations in case of global catastrophe. A space probe sent out with messages for potential alien civilizations, knowing it wouldn't reach anything for 40,000 years. A clock built inside a mountain that was supposed to tick for 10,000 years, maintained by humans who would be dust before it completed a single cycle. Doctor noticed their confusion during the afternoon briefing. She sat across from them in the conference room, her hands folded calmly on the table. "You seem troubled," she said. "Is something wrong with our technological assessments?" Osh chose his words carefully. "We've noticed an unusual pattern in human engineering. You frequently design structures and projects that extend far beyond your natural. This seems inefficient." Doctor smiled again, but this time there was something in her expression Osh couldn't read. "You mean we build things for our beyond," interjected. "You build for descendants you'll never meet, for humans who will be born centuries after you die. Why?" Doctor leaned back in her chair. "Because someone has to." The simplicity of the answer made Osh's head hurt. "But you gain nothing from it. The resources you spend, the time you invest, all of it is wasted on your generation." "Is it wasted if our children benefit? If their children benefit?" "But you won't see that benefit," Osh insisted. "You'll be dead. Your consciousness will cease. Why spend your limited time on something that won't help you?" Doctor was quiet for a moment. When she spoke again, her voice was gentle, as if explaining something to a child. "My grandmother planted an apple tree when I was 5 years old. It took 15 years before that tree produced good fruit. She died when I was 12. She never tasted a single apple from that tree." "Then why plant it?" asked. "Because she knew I would taste them, and my children would, and their children would. She planted that tree knowing she was planting it for me specifically. She looked at 5-year-old me and thought, when Sarah is 20, she'll have fresh apples." Osh shook his head. "That's irrational." "Maybe," Doctor agreed. "But I eat those apples every fall, and I planted 3 more trees 5 years ago. My daughter is 6 now. In 15 years she'll have fresh apples too. I probably won't live to see it, but I know it will happen." She stood up, moving to the window that overlooked the university campus. "Come here. Look down there." Osh joined her. Below they could see humans moving between buildings. Some old, some young, all busy with their short lives. "That building there," Doctor pointed to a stone structure covered in ivy. "Built in 1450. The architects never saw it completed. That library was funded by a woman who died before construction began. She left money in her will specifically for it. That garden was designed by a man who planted trees he knew would take 80 years to reach full height. He was 70 when he planted them." "I don't understand," Osh said quietly. "I know," Doctor replied, "but maybe you will. Would you like to meet some of these irrational humans, see them at work?" His eyes brightened. "Yes, I think we need to understand this better." Osh wanted to refuse. He wanted to file his report, mark humans as technologically adequate but culturally inefficient, and move on to his next assignment. But something nagged at him, a question he couldn't quite articulate. "Fine," he said. "We'll observe your workers, but I expect this will only confirm that your species wastes considerable resources on pointless future planning." Doctor's smile widened. "We'll see." Part 2. The next morning, Doctor took them to a shipyard on the coast. The facility stretched for kilometers, filled with massive construction frames and the sound of metal being shaped. Humans swarmed over the structures like insects, each one focused on their small part of a much larger whole. "What are they building?" asked, her voice filled with wonder. "A generation ship," Doctor replied. "It will carry 20,000 colonists to a planet 40 light-years away. The journey will take 230 years. Osh stared at the skeletal frame of the ship. "None of your current crew will survive to see arrival." "No," Doctor agreed. "The people who designed this ship are already dead. The engineers who are building it will die before it launches. The colonists who board it will die before it reaches halfway. Their children will die. There will die. The great of the people who leave Earth will be the ones who step onto a new world." "Then why build it?" Osh demanded. "Why spend resources on something that benefits no one alive today?" Doctor turned to face him directly. "It benefits everyone who will be alive tomorrow, and the day after, and a century after that. We're not building this ship for us. We're building it for humans who haven't been born yet." She led them into the shipyard proper. They walked past workers welding seams, checking systems, running diagnostics. Every human they passed was focused, dedicated, working as if their own lives depended on the ship's success. Doctor stopped beside an older man who was programming a navigation computer. His hair was completely white, his hands marked with age spots and old scars. "This is James," she introduced. "He's been working on this project for 30 years. James looked up and nodded. His face was creased with lines, but his eyes were sharp. "Welcome. First time seeing a generation ship." "We don't build them," Osh said. "They're inefficient. By the time the ship arrives, the technology is obsolete. Better to wait for faster engines." James chuckled, a dry sound that made Osh's scales itch. "Maybe. But the people who wanted to leave Earth 30 years ago would have waited forever for a faster ship that never came. The colonists who board this ship in 5 years won't care if it's the fastest design possible. They'll care that it works." "But you'll never see it work," said softly. "You'll be gone before it even launches." "Probably," James agreed. He turned back to his screen, fingers moving across the interface with practiced ease. "But I've seen the colonists. They bring their children to the shipyard sometimes, show them the vessel that will be their home. There's a girl, maybe 8 years old, who comes every week with her mother. She always asks me questions about the navigation system." He paused, something sad and proud crossing his face. "She'll be 20 when the ship launches. She'll spend her entire life on this vessel, never setting foot on a planet. But her children will. And when they do, when they breathe air under an alien sky, part of that moment will be because of the work I'm doing right now. I'll be dead for 150 years, but I'll still have helped them take that first step." Osh wanted to argue, but something in James's expression stopped him. The old human wasn't sad. He wasn't resigned. He looked satisfied. Over the following days, Doctor introduced them to more humans. A climate scientist who spent her entire career collecting atmospheric data that wouldn't be fully analyzed for 50 years. A forestry worker who planted trees that would take a century to mature. A teacher who trained students in mathematics they would use to solve problems that didn't exist yet. Each human gave the same basic answer when asked why they did this work. Because someone had to. Because their children would need it. Because the future was built by people who would never see it. Started carrying a small notebook, writing down quotes from the humans they met. Osh caught her reading it one evening in their shared workspace. "What are you doing?" he asked. "Trying to understand," she said. "Listen to this. A woman today told me she maintains an old church organ. It was built 400 years ago. She spends hours every week cleaning pipes, adjusting mechanisms, replacing worn parts. When I asked her why, she said, because someone maintained it for me and someone will maintain it after me." "So," Osh said, "don't you see? She's part of a chain. Humans going back centuries have touched that organ, cared for it, kept it working. And humans centuries from now will do the same. She's not just maintaining an instrument. She's connecting past to future." Osh shook his head. "That's anthropomorphizing. You're reading meaning into simple maintenance work." But wasn't listening. She had that look she got when an idea was forming, when all the scattered pieces were starting to fit together into a pattern. "What if that's the point?" she said slowly. "What if humans don't see themselves as individuals at all? What if they see themselves as links in a chain that stretches backward to their ancestors and forward to their descendants?" "That's absurd," Osh said. But even as he spoke, he thought about the cathedral builders who designed structures they'd never see, the tree planters who created forests for they'd never meet, the engineer programming navigation for a ship he'd never board. The next day, Doctor took them to a place she called a family farm. It was smaller than the shipyard, quieter than the university. An old house sat among fields and orchards, worn but well-maintained. An elderly woman met them at the door. Her name was, and she moved slowly, her body bent with age. But her eyes were alert, taking in the two aliens with curiosity rather than fear. "Come in," she said. "Sarah told me you wanted to see how we work." Inside, the house was filled with photographs. Generations of humans stared out from frames on every wall, led them to the kitchen where a younger woman and a small child were working with flour and water. "My granddaughter and my great-granddaughter Sophie," said, "we're making bread." Osh watched as the three humans worked together, showed how to knead the dough properly, showed Sophie how to shape the loaves. Sophie's small hands were clumsy, but the older women patiently guided her. "My grandmother taught me to make bread this way," said, "and her grandmother taught her. The recipe is over 200 years old, passed down mother to daughter for 7 generations." "Why?" Osh asked. He had asked that question so many times in the past week, but still didn't understand the answer. Looked at him with those sharp old eyes. "Because Sophie will teach her daughter, and her daughter will teach her daughter. And maybe in 200 more years, a girl who shares my blood will make this same bread, and think about her great-great-great-great-grandmother who taught her great-great-great-great-grandmother." She turned back to the dough. "I'm 93 years old. I'll probably be dead within 5 years, but this recipe will live, and every time someone makes it, I'll live too in a way. Not me personally, but the knowledge I carried forward." Sophie looked up at the aliens, flour on her nose. "When I'm old like great-grandma, I'll teach my kids too." His eyes were wide. "You understand that? You're only, 5 years old?" "6," Sophie corrected proudly. "And yeah, I understand. That's what people do. You learn stuff so you can teach it later." On the drive back to the university was quiet. Osh knew that look. She was processing, integrating, forming conclusions. "They're not individuals," she said finally, "not the way we are." "What do you mean?" Osh asked, though part of him already knew. "We live for ourselves. The build for their own 200-year lives. The optimize for their 70 cycles. Even the who live for 600 years rarely plan beyond their own existence. We're all fundamentally isolated. We're born, we live, we die, and existence centers on that individual experience." She turned to look at Osh. "But humans aren't like that. They see themselves as part of something continuous. They inherit from the past and pay forward to the future. That cathedral wasn't built by individuals. It was built by a continuity of human existence that spanned 2 centuries. The generation ship isn't being constructed by these humans. It's being constructed by humanity itself, an entity that spans multiple lifetimes. That's philosophy, not analysis, Osh said. No, it's their greatest innovation, insisted. They've found a way to think beyond their own mortality. They cooperate across time itself. A human who died 100 years ago can still influence the present through the things they built and the knowledge they passed on. And humans alive today can influence a future they'll never see. Osh wanted to dismiss it, but he couldn't stop thinking about James and his navigation computer, about and her bread recipe, about the woman who maintained an organ built 4 centuries before she was born. We need to report this, said. The consortium needs to understand what humans are actually doing. Osh nodded slowly. For the first time in 200 years of service, he wasn't sure how to write his assessment report. Part 3. The Galactic Innovation Consortium met in a vast chamber aboard their orbital station. Representatives from 47 species filled the seats, their various forms illuminated by the soft glow of holographic displays. Osh stood at the central podium, beside him, facing the assembled analysts and administrators. He had spent 2 weeks writing his report. It was the longest report he had ever filed, and the strangest. The humans, he began, his voice carrying through the chamber's translation systems, represent a unique form of technological development. They consistently design and build projects that extend far beyond their individual, creating a form of temporal cooperation that we have not observed in any other species. Murmurs rippled through the chamber. Administrator, or a massive or who had lived for 500 years, raised one of his primary appendages. Clarify temporal cooperation, he rumbled. Activated the holographic display. Images of human projects filled the air above them. Cathedrals, forests, libraries, the generation ship. Humans plan and execute projects that benefit descendants they will never meet, she explained. They do this not occasionally, but as a fundamental aspect of their culture. They build tools, structures, and systems specifically for future generations. That's inefficient, someone called from the back. Osh recognized the voice as belonging to an administrator. Resources should be optimized for current use. That's what we thought initially, Osh admitted. But consider this. Every species in this consortium plans primarily within their own, the build for 200 years, the for 70, the or for 600. But what happens when a problem requires 1,000 years to solve, or 10,000? Silence fell over the chamber. We don't solve it, Osh said quietly. We can't. Our entire framework of innovation assumes that those who begin a project should benefit from its completion. We optimize for returns within our lifetime. Humans don't have that limitation because they've learned to think beyond their own mortality. Administrator or leaned forward. This is an interesting observation, but it seems more philosophical than practical. Why does this matter to the consortium? Before Osh could answer, alarms began blaring throughout the station. The emergency session was called immediately. Osh and were ushered into the council chambers along with the other analysts. The central display showed a star system called Helios 7, home to 4 inhabited planets and over 12 billion people from 3 different species. The star is becoming unstable, a scientific advisor announced. Solar activity had spiked dramatically over the past week. The models were clear. Within a decade, Helios 7 would undergo a massive coronal event that would strip the atmospheres from all 4 planets. We need to evacuate, someone said. Impossible, the advisor replied. We can't move 12 billion people in 10 years. We don't have enough ships. Then we need to shield the planets, administrator or said. Can it be done? The advisor pulled up engineering projections. A network of satellites equipped with magnetic field generators positioned around each planet. It was theoretically possible. The technology existed. Then the advisor added the timeline: 150 years to design, manufacture, and deploy the full system. The chamber erupted in argument. Representatives shouted over each other, each species proposing their own solutions. But every proposal had the same problem. The project would take longer than any of them lived. No current generation would see the completion. No current leader would receive credit for the success. And so, one by one, the representatives backed away from committing resources. Too expensive, they said. Too uncertain. Too long-term. Why should they spend their resources on a problem their children would have to manage? Osh watched the debate spiral into paralysis. He saw the problem clearly now, saw how their shared limitation trapped them all. They could save 12 billion lives, but only if they were willing to start something they'd never finish. Stood suddenly, what if we asked the humans? The chamber fell silent. Every translator, every set of eyes turned toward the young analyst. Why would humans help? Administrator or asked. They have no stake in Helios 7, no citizens there, no economic interests. Because someone has to, said simply. She activated her and pulled up her notes from Earth. Humans build for futures they'll never see. That's what they do. It's not about benefit or credit. It's about the work itself, about being part of something larger than their individual existence. Osh found himself nodding. She's right. If any species in the consortium can commit to a 150-year project with no immediate benefit, it's humanity. 3 days later, a human delegation arrived at the consortium station. Doctor led the group, along with engineers, scientists, and project managers. They reviewed the situation, examined the models, and studied the proposed solutions. Then they surprised everyone by proposing a better design. The human lead engineer, a young woman named, presented their alternative. Your satellite design would work, but it's inefficient. If we modify the magnetic field generators and integrate them with a particle deflection grid, we can reduce the deployment timeline to 90 years and increase effectiveness by 40%. 90 years is still beyond any human, administrator or pointed out. Why would your species commit to this? Looked confused by the question. Because 12 billion people will die if we don't. What does our have to do with it? Doctor stepped forward. Administrator, you're thinking about this wrong. You're asking why individual humans would commit to this project. But we're not asking individuals to commit. We're asking humanity to commit. The engineers who design this system will train the engineers who build it. Those engineers will train the engineers who deploy it. We're all links in the chain. She pulled up images from Earth. The cathedral that took 200 years. The generation ship being built for colonists not yet born. The nuclear waste repository designed for 10,000 years. This is what we do, she said simply. We build things for people we'll never meet. We solve problems that won't affect us. We plant trees we'll never sit under because someday someone will need that shade. The vote was closer than it should have been. Many species still hesitated, still worried about the cost and commitment. But eventually, with human engineers leading the project design and human commitment backing the resources, the consortium approved the Helios 7 Protection Initiative. Construction began 6 months later. Osh attended the groundbreaking ceremony at the first manufacturing facility. He watched humans and aliens working side by side, building components for satellites that wouldn't be deployed for decades. He found examining a magnetic field generator prototype. She was making adjustments to a design schematic, her face creased in concentration. You'll never see this installed, Osh said. It wasn't a question. Looked up and smiled. No, probably not. I'm 32 years old. Even if I live to 100, that's only 68 more years. This generator won't reach its deployment position for 75 years. Doesn't that bother you? Why would it? Made another adjustment to her schematic. Somewhere in the Helios system, there's probably a kid who's, I don't know, 5 years old right now. She's playing with friends, going to school, learning to read. She doesn't know that her world is going to be saved. But when she's 105 years old, when her greats are playing under a sun that should have killed their planet generations ago, she'll be alive because of what we're building right now. Saved her schematic and looked directly at Osh. I'll never meet that little girl. I'll never know her name, but I know she exists. And I know that my work today means she gets to exist in the future. That's not a burden, it's a privilege. Over the following years, Osh watched the project develop. Human techniques began spreading through the consortium. They started planning infrastructure projects that extended beyond their 200-year. The established universities with 1,000-year teaching missions. Even the long-lived or began thinking in terms of institutional continuity rather than individual achievement. Became something of an expert on human culture. She wrote papers, gave lectures, helped other species understand the shift in thinking that humanity had brought to the galaxy. One evening, 15 years after their first visit to Earth, Osh found her on the observation deck of the consortium station. She was looking toward the Helios system, though of course it was too far away to see with the naked eye. The first satellite cluster will deploy in 75 years, she said without turning around. Neither of us will live to see it. Osh, now over 200 years old and nearing the end of his natural, nodded. I know. I've been thinking about that little girl mentioned, the 5-year-old in the Helios system. She's 20 now, old enough to understand that her world is being saved, old enough to know that people she's never met from species she might never encounter are building something to protect her future. Turn to face him. We're doing what humans do. We're building for a future we won't see, and it doesn't feel inefficient anymore. It feels right. Osh looked at his young colleague, not so young anymore. She had spent half her 70 cycle studying humans and implementing their ideas. She would die before the Helios project completed, but her work would live on, carried forward by others who had learned from her. You were right, he said quietly. Back on Earth, when you said humans had found a way to think beyond their own mortality, they didn't defeat death, they just learned to cooperate across it. Decades later, when the first Helios protection satellites came online, Osh and were both long dead. But their reports, their insights, their careful documentation of human innovation had been preserved and passed forward. The activation ceremony was attended by thousands. Representatives from every consortium species gathered to watch as the magnetic field generators powered up, creating an invisible shield around the first planet. Humans and aliens who had worked on the project stood together, many of them children or of the original design team. Doctor, now in her 90s and using a walking aid, stood at the podium to speak. Beside her was, gray-haired but still sharp-eyed, and a young woman introduced as Arya's granddaughter and the new lead engineer for Phase 2. Today we activate a system designed by people who are no longer with us, Doctor said, her voice still strong despite her age. Built by people who won't live to see its completion, for the benefit of people who won't be born for generations. This is the gift humans tried to bring to the consortium. Not better technology or faster ships, just the understanding that civilization isn't built in a single lifetime. It's built by the continuous effort of every generation, each adding their work to an endless project. She paused, looking up at the stars. Senior analyst Osh and junior analyst visited Earth 43 years ago. They were the first to truly see what we were trying to show the galaxy. They're both gone now, but their work continues. The reports they filed, the insights they shared, the connections they made between human thinking and galactic need, all of that lives on. They planted a tree they never sat under, and today we rest in its shade. The satellites came online one by one, each one adding to the protective field. On the planet below, billions of people went about their lives, most not even aware that their great-great had just been saved by people who died before they were born. Arya stood at her grandmother's side, watching the activation sequence complete. had trained her for this role, had spent 30 years passing on knowledge and techniques, and Arya was already training her own apprentices, young engineers who would carry the work forward into the next century. In the end, humans hadn't taught the galaxy how to build better technology. They had taught them how to think beyond their own existence, how to become links in an unbroken chain stretching from the distant past into the unimaginable future. And across the galaxy, species who once thought only of their own began to plant trees they would never sit under, knowing that someday someone would need the shade.